Hey guys, this is John and I'm playing artscispo in a 15+2 game on lichess.org. Okay, so my opponent opens with d4. I'm going to stay flexible with g6, intending the fianchetto bishop g7. White faces an important decision here as far as how they want to continue because knight c3, knight f3, e4, all those moves are playable and have some value. So, okay, so knight c3, I'm going to play c5, and we just might get a Dzindzi-Indian with bishop takes c3 check followed by f5. An unusual system that I've mostly played in Blitz and Bullet. In fact, I can't recall a standard game in which I've had a chance to try out this system. I played this over the board before. Not with a great deal of success, actually, but I have played it. So it's an intriguing line. You can see that I'm inflicting doubled pawns on white early on, giving up my seemingly strong dark square bishop, but I've got a clamp on e4, and I hope I can demonstrate kind of a harmonious way of playing this position for black, which usually entails the moves queen a5, d6, knight bd7 to b6, bishop d7, and then very often castling queenside. Even though there's this open b file, it's not out of the question at all that black would end up castling long. So, okay, bishop h6. So this clearly has in mind the idea of stopping me from castling short, but also maybe playing around with bishop g7. I think I can just toss in queen a5 right now because the fact that he's stopping me from castling short doesn't bother me. As I've said, my king might go queenside anyways. And if he plays bishop g7 after that, I can take on c3 with check. So I see no issue with that. So I'm going to pop the queen out to a5 and just see how white reacts to this. Likely he'll move his queen somewhere. I would expect queen c2 in this position to defend the pawn. I don't think he's going to want to admit that bishop h6 was the wrong square for it. So, okay, he does make a queen move, queen b3. Now, I have to decide here if it's worth my time to try to stop bishop g7. I'm kind of leaning towards no. So I'm tempted just to play d6, and if bishop g7, play rook g8, he takes on f6, I take back, and then continue with this aforementioned idea of getting knight to b6. Usual way of developing for black. But I'm also considering here playing knight e4, attacking the c3 pawn again, entrenching that knight in on a good square, and then bishop g7 would only hit the rook. So I think there's a lot to be said about that move as well. So just pausing for a second to consider my options. Not too many other candidate moves come to mind. It's usually good to have at least 2 or 3 moves in a position that's, especially a non-forcing position, that you can consider. So, yeah, you know what? I like knight e4. I think I'm going to do that. It's probably of value to get white to play rook c1, a value to my position, that is. I don't know that white really wants their rook on that square long term, so let's just see how white reacts to this. An interesting thing that I probably should have mentioned is that white doesn't necessarily have to defend the c3 pawn right away. So if you imagine I get another move and I follow through on this threat, so let's say I play queen takes, there could be a trade, and then bishop g7 would still be attacking both the rook on h8 and now the knight on c3. Okay, so white goes knight d2. I'm probably going to capture that knight. Yeah, I don't think allowing white to take is a very smart idea, so I think I'm just going to take myself and then get on with my development. Yeah, let's do that. So capture this guy. Probably bishop takes is going to be played, so I may no longer have to worry about this bishop peering at my king side. Yeah, now let's just go d6. Is queen b5 check something I have to concern myself with? Nah. Queen b5 check will straighten out white's pawns, but I think the fact that my knight can get to a decent square is going to compensate. Although maybe white could play queen b5 and after take, then go c4 and try to put the bishop on c3. That's something I'm going to look at in the analysis. All right, so let's just play this now. So white does have the bishop pair, but they continue to be saddled with these doubled c pawns. I'm thinking white should have played queen b5 check, and maybe I should not have allowed that. Maybe this whole idea of playing d6 was wrong against queen b3, but we'll see. Not wrong, but maybe there's a better way to play it. Okay, so now he plays queen b5. But the fact that this move does not come with check means I have more options, like bringing the queen back to c7, for instance, which I am leaning toward right now. There's also the trade, and then quickly planting the knight on b6 in order to attack that pawn, and c4 would just lose a pawn to knight takes c4. So what about that? So take, knight b6, let's say bishop g2, and then knight into c4 perhaps? That's a pretty annoying knight. I think I'm going to do that. And I'm going to do it quick too. By the way, I'm happy to report that I ended up winning that tournament I mentioned. So in my last video, I was talking about how I was playing the Minnesota Open, which is a 6-round event, our state open championship. And I played that this past weekend and I won the event. I scored 5.5 out of 6. I might share the games on my channel. I'm still considering whether I want to conduct some analysis on those. Played some pretty intriguing games, so I would like to share that with you guys in some capacity. I did post the games on Lichess. I'll link them in the comments below if you haven't seen them. They're on my Twitter. So bishop g2. So here I'm looking at bishop d7 and knight c4. Both moves are possible. Not sure if the order matters a whole lot. Let's go knight c4 actually first, just to stop white from castling short. So we're going to eye this bishop and therefore try to slow white down just ever so slightly. Maybe make my opponent spend another tempo with the bishop and then go bishop d7 next move. I might have a decent chance to launch a quick attack against white's queenside. Okay, so a4. Because I'm thinking bishop d7 and a quick a6 and try to win this a4 pawn. So let's play bishop d7 now. And I think white's going to have to burn a move dealing with this guy. I would expect bishop f4, bishop g5, maybe even bishop to h6, one of those moves. So white can prepare castling. Since the queens are off the board, it's not necessary for white to castle, but I don't see a better way for them to coordinate their position, is the main thing. So I would expect white to try to castle short here. Otherwise, this rook on h1 is a long ways away from participating. Sometimes a motif you see in this structure is white playing h4, h5. So I guess it's not out of the question white could try that too. Then we could imagine a trade on the h-file and maybe a swap here. King d1. Okay. That's kind of a ugly looking move, I gotta say. So I think white's trying to get the king to c2 and connect the rooks that way, but I don't know that the king really belongs on the queen side. I guess we'll find out. So again, I can play this a6 move. a6, and if king c2, maybe then just play king f7 and get my rooks connected. Yeah, let's do a6. One thing I really like about my position right now is that my minor pieces seem more effective than my opponent's right now. So even though white has the bishop pair, the position is relatively closed. You can see that there hasn't even been any pawn trades yet. And I've got this dominant knight on c4. The bishop is also doing some nice work attacking the b pawn. This bishop is just shooting into the void, or shooting not even into the void, but into white's own pawn on d5. This one I don't think is doing a whole lot. So king c2, so I can't win the pawn immediately because after take and take, white will be attacking my rook. And if a takes b5, a takes b5, rook takes a1, rook takes a1, then bishop takes b5, white has rook a8 check. So I got to play some sort of move here that allows me to defend this rook on a8. So either castles or king f7. I think I'm going to play king f7. Just debating if I want to take first, but no, I think it's a little bit better to play king f7 and then keep the tension for a moment. Because if white takes, that just helps me as far as I can tell. I take with the rook. I've got the bishop and the rook pointed at the a4 pawn. So yeah, let's invite white to take or keep the tension and just see what happens. b6 is maybe a move I should have looked at, but I think I can just play knight takes and then the a4 pawn is in trouble. Let's see. b6, knight takes b6. Let's say rook fb1. Bishop takes a4 check, followed by bishop b5 is going to do the trick. Yeah, that should be fine. Some of these details are things that I think previously in my standard videos I would be striving to check on every single move, but I'm really trying to force myself to play faster in these 15-minute games. I gotta get into the middle game with 10, 9, 8 minutes remaining, something like that. I very often entered the middle game where I'm basically forced to play a blitz game already. I've got 5 minutes or less on my clock, and that's just not good time management in these 15+2 games. I want to reiterate something that I've mentioned before in many videos. I even did a video just dedicated to this topic. But if you're out there and you've hit a plateau in your chess improvement and you're not already a good player, which I would define as, let's say, 2000 plus, chances are you're probably not playing enough standard chess. Or if you are playing standard chess, longer games, rapid games, you're not analyzing those games thoroughly. I think that's super important, and I know I've just harped on this point many, many times, but if there's one thing I would suggest to you people out there who want to get better at chess is make a point to play longer games. Give yourself time to think. Blitz and bullet don't cut it. Title players can get away with blitz and bullet because they've just played so much chess in general. I mean, I played like almost 200 over-the-board events, so I feel like I'm at a level where blitz and bullet doesn't hurt me, but even I don't really learn that much just playing blitz and bullet. So everyone needs the time to think. Play your standard games. So e4. It's probably a decent try by white, trying to open the position. This also gives the bishop maybe some access here. I don't think I have to take the pawn, so I'm thinking of just grabbing here. The position is going to open up a little bit, but no harm, no foul. So let's say a takes b5, a takes b5, bishop takes b5. Don't think rook b1 is at all a concern. Maybe bishop f1 is a little annoying, however. Maybe I should take on b5 and then pick the pawn up with a check from the knight. But then king b3. Somehow I feel like my knight's going to get on a weird square. Maybe not. Maybe that's okay. I think I'm deciding that I don't want to take this way, though. I might change my mind, but let's see. Well, okay, that other line I just looked at, a takes b5, a takes b5, bishop takes b5. If bishop f1, I think just knight takes d2 is plenty fine there. So a b, if he takes on f5 after bishop takes b5, again, I can take on d2 if I want. Okay, this is a kind of a minor thing, so I'm going to take and still consider which way I'm going to recapture. I'm almost positive I'm going to take, so let's maybe just let white think for even a split second here while I consider which way I'm going to do this when he recaptures. Trying to think on my opponent's time a little bit. I don't feel like I want to take this bishop yet. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but that bishop is just so unimpressive to me. I think I should try to gain something from my knight being on c4 still. So I'm looking at, after a takes b5, either knight a3 check or bishop takes b5. If bishop takes b5, e takes f5, I can just take back. Bishop f1, knight takes d2, bishop takes b5, knight e4. That looks better for me, but nothing spectacular. Knight a3 check is kind of a cool move, but I think king b3 will probably be played. And then after knight takes b5, I don't like the position of my knight there. Somehow that square just seems bad to me. But then again, I don't see how white's going to take advantage. So bishop takes or knight a3 check. Looking at bishop takes one more time. Bishop takes, e takes f5, g takes f5, bishop f1. There's even bishop a4 check there, isn't there? Bishop a4 check. Okay, I'm going to take with the bishop. Yeah. We're not going to get carried away with the knight a3, knight takes b5 operation. I'll trust my instinct that the knight belongs on c4, where it's eyeing d2 and maybe gives me options for knight a3. He does take. Okay. So again, I could take here if I want, but I feel like I should delay that decision. Yeah, so take. And also he would have had an in-between move if I took. He could play f takes g6 check. I think if I were white, I would probably play bishop f4 right now. It's uncomfortable for white that knight takes d2 is hanging over his head on any given move. h3, wow. See, that's not even a move that would be on my radar, really. That's a creative attempt. Possibly not a good move. I mean, it just looks very slow, trying to go g4. Okay, so I'm up one pawn, but it's not so easy just to trade down, because we got a standoff going on the a file. I don't want to be the first one to take. I could play knight a3 check and just see how he reacts. I could take on d2 and play bishop c4. That's kind of interesting, and then try to go b5 after that. Maybe that's not a bad plan. Then this pawn is pretty weak in the endgame. Not seeing what other value I get out of this knight. I've kept it on c4 for quite a while. He might change his mind and play bishop f4 in the future. Kind of blocked up. I mean, I need to use the b pawn at some stage. Yeah, all right, let's do it. So take, and then we're going to go here next move. I think that's a nice, cozy spot for my bishop. Constantly eyeing d5 and allowing for this next. Maybe once I get my pawn up to b5, I can use that as a method to get my rook to a4, perhaps in preparation for doubling. h4. I don't get it. Why go h3 and then h4? That doesn't make sense. I mean, bishop h3 can't be played because of this. So, yeah, I don't get it. Okay, let's go b5. If your opponent does something that's just truly baffling to you, and you see their move, you try to figure out what they're up to, and you just don't come up with anything, well, you just got to make a move and trust that your instincts are better about the position. Sometimes you might just be flat out wrong, but you can only trust yourself in chess when you're playing a game. So king e3. Okay, so king's coming up to f4. White's play just strikes me as very random. So I'm going to do this plan that I mentioned. I think I'm going to play rook a4 with the intention of doubling. And I might even give white the f5 pawn. If it comes to that, we'll see. But yeah, I like rook a4. So if white wants to take, he has to give me this outside a pawn, past a pawn, that could be dangerous. If white doesn't take, then I've got this move on the way, activating this rook that up till this point isn't doing anything. So now if white plays king f4, I might be in a position where I can already just run this a pawn. And that's not out of the question at all. Okay, so rook comes here. Probably I'm going to play rook a8 against that. So I think the game might go rook a8, king f4, a3, king takes f5, a2. And then my plan will be just rook b8 to b1. Yeah, first I need to play this, though. Let's just get the rook behind the pawn where it belongs. Maybe on king f4 I don't even have to... Okay, he's going to play that. That's probably a good defensive move. Yeah. I missed that move. For some reason, rook a3 didn't cross my mind. The rook's very passive on that square, so I like the fact that he can't really do much with it, but then again, it is stopping my pawn. Okay, maybe now king f6. Maybe we'll just make a little progress with the king here. Yeah, white is really tied down in this position, so let's do that to start. Looks useful in almost every case. No real threat for either one of us, that is, but possibilities. If e5 check, he can take en passant, so I feel like I should move my bishop. Or maybe even play a waiting move here. I mean, he's got waiting moves he can do, though, like bishop f3, for instance. So maybe a waiting move doesn't cut it. Well, let's play bishop b3. Yeah, I'll stick the bishop on that square. So that frees up my rook, at least. It no longer has to stay defending the a-pawn, so maybe I can play this coming up. Find some way to activate it. Okay, now I can take d5 if I want. feel like that's somewhat of an achievement for me. Yeah, and you know what? If he takes on f5, I can play e5 check, king here, and then h5 check. And I think he's just losing that bishop. e5 check, king's got to go to g4 to keep the bishop held, and then h5. Yeah, and that wins that piece. Okay. Or rook g8, probably even better to play rook g8, king here, rook g8 check. Then I won't even have to sacrifice my h-pawn. He might win the a-pawn there, but yeah, realistically, either move is good. Actually, maybe I even have a way to finish this off with h5. King g4, h5 check. If king takes, I don't have to take the bishop even immediately. I can play bishop f3. Yeah, and that was going to be losing for white, so my opponent resigned. Okay, so my choice in opening worked out in this one. The Dzindzi-Indian. If you're looking for a dynamic d4 defense, then the Dzindzi-Indian might be up your alley. I can't vouch for the soundness of this opening. I think it is dubious. I think with decent play, white gets an advantage for sure. Probably bordering on a clear advantage. So at least a slight advantage, maybe a clear advantage. But if you're encountering this line for the first time from the white side, it's not easy to handle, trust me. Because the first time I saw this system, when I was playing d4, my thoughts were, what is going on in black's head that they would want to give up this beautiful dark square bishop? I know it doubles the pawns, and then they're going to play f5 on top of that. They're going to move the forget about it pawn. Like, is white insane, or is black insane? But the clamp that black gets on e4 and the fact that the position remains closed makes it difficult for white to utilize the bishop pair. And black does have this harmonious development plan that I mentioned. So it's not at all easy for white to continue and figure out a good plan if they're just seeing it on the spot for the first time. Some of the best moves for white, by the way, are e4. White can try to gambit a pawn here to open things up. That's fully thematic. Also, you often see white playing h4, h5 and trying to immediately open a front on the king side. That's a good option for white as well. Against routine development like knight f3, bishop f4, e3, black tends to get a good position, but otherwise there are some nice antidotes from the white side. One thing I will say, though, you can't get the Dzindzi-Indian every time if you go with this move order, because as I mentioned on move 3, white does not have to play knight c3. In fact, a lot of d4 players avoid playing knight c3, I think specifically because they don't want to go into the Dzindzi-Indian. So e4 is also entirely playable, as is knight f3. I had a game this past weekend, in fact, in round 2 of the Minnesota Open where my opponent played knight f3 in this position, and I played c5. So you can't get the Dzindzi-Indian all the time. As far as general comments about this game, so I think bishop h6 is already a step in the wrong direction. However, I don't think I played this 100% correctly. Queen a5 looks good. That's a tempo move on the pawn. That seems fine. But queen b3 is a good way of defending the pawn and also introducing this queen b5 check option when I play d6. So I think this is a point in my analysis that I'm going to zero in on and maybe see if I have some sort of improvement. I played knight e4. But yeah, even this move I'm not sure about because, as I mentioned, taking on c3 is not yet a threat. If queen takes, knight takes, assuming black gets another move, that runs into bishop g7. I've got two undefended pieces. Knight on c3, rook on h8. White can attack both of them. Also, if knight takes c3 first, white can pull the bishop back to d2 and pin my queen on a5. So that's also not going to cut it. So this could be considered kind of an empty threat for now. I think white will have to contend with that in the future, but I'm going to look at that move with the computer and see what it says. So white played knight takes d2, or knight d2 rather, and we got a trade on d2. Yeah, so this is the key moment. If white's going to play queen b5, I think it's best to do it now. Because then after the trade, white can try to quickly get that pawn up to c4 and plant the bishop on c3 perhaps, before I get a chance to do this little maneuver and into c4. Because I feel like as the game unfolded here with queen b5 in the trade, I feel like black's already doing well at this stage. The pawn on d5 is under attack, so that obligates white to play bishop g2. And now I sink that knight into c4. That's nasty for white. The bishop's constantly under fire. White can't connect their pawns here. They really need that c4 pawn up there to defend both d5 and b5, and that's just prevented. So hence, the A pawn had to come to the rescue of the B pawn, which will soon be under attack. But you can see this lever that I used, A6, in order to attack the B5 pawn, and in due time, the A4 pawn as well. King D1, really don't like that move. I think bishop F4 is probably the move to play here. Move the bishop somewhere and then castle short. That just looks more natural to me. King D1 to C2. I mean, it takes the same amount of moves, so I'm trying to describe why King D1 rubs me the wrong way compared to moving the bishop and then castling. It might be because the bishop has to move eventually anyways, so even if this takes 2 moves, and after those 2 moves the rooks are connected, the fact that the knight is always attacking the bishop, I think, is a cause for concern for white. So I think that's the main reason I don't like King D1 as much as moving the bishop and then castling. And after this, I don't see how white avoids losing a pawn. Whether they let me take on B5 coming up, or whether they take on A6 and I take with a rook and A4 is under fire. I think it's just bound to happen. Remember, I need that King F7 move to connect my rooks to get this guy defended first. Now white tried to open the position, and I said I kind of like this move. Maybe the computer will disagree and offer something else, but it seems correct to me. White's got to seek counterplay elsewhere. They can't just sit back and let me completely control the position and have an extra pawn. You know, one strategy, if you're white here, one defensive strategy to keep in mind is trying to navigate the game into an opposite color bishop position. If you could get it to an opposite color bishop endgame, so aka trade, this would be tough to do, but so trade this bishop for this knight and end up with dark square bishop for white against light square bishop for black. That could increase white's drawing chances, because opposite color bishops are notorious for producing drawish endgames, even if one side is up a pawn or two. It's a little far-fetched here. There's a ton of pawns on the board, but that would be a rough goal for white. But you can see it's tough for white to pull that off, because theoretically I think they need to move the e-pawn and, you know, get the bishop firing against the knight, but I don't see how to do that so easily. Especially with b5 collapsing and d5 also needing protection. So we get this trade. I was debating about knight a3 check. I'm kind of glad I played it this way, though. And this move just makes no sense to me. Well, I should say h3 makes some sense, trying to go g4, but after this trade and then white playing h4, that whole 2 tempi expenditure in order to get the pawn to h4 just doesn't, yeah, that doesn't stand up to analysis here. That's a whole 2 tempi white has burned, and they haven't really achieved anything for that. I guess it enables bishop h3, but remember that bishop has to stay guarding the pawn on d5 at virtually all time. Then again, I'm not sure. White doesn't have a good position here. They're down a pawn, but maybe white should move the bishop. Play bishop f4, and then try for bishop f1 and take this knight. Even then, though, I mean, I take back and d5 is constantly under fire. But get this bishop out from attack, I think, is the main way I would play this. Yeah, I think after this trade and then planting the bishop here, and then this plan of b5 followed by rook a4, black is firmly in the driver's seat. Got the passed a pawn, supported by the rook and in some cases the bishop. Rook a3 was a move to at least slow me down. That was a good move, I think, by white, because white just doesn't have much here. But if allowed, I'm going to play a3, a2, rook b8, and then rook b1, and it'll be game over with my bishop protecting the pawn on a2. So rook a3, good thinking by white to at least slow me down there, but I think it's just a lost position now, unfortunately. Yeah, bishop into b3 just to free the rook. And now white let me take on d5 and then lost tactically, but let's just think, if white had played a waiting move here, let's say white had played bishop f3, what we would do. Because my rook is now freed up. It's not needed to defend the pawn on a4, but you can see that there's not a lot of open avenues for play. So if you want to try to pause the video and figure out what you would do, feel free to do that now. The idea I'm considering is, so let's say if bishop f3, maybe going rook e8 with the idea of e5 check. And then when white takes en passant, taking with my rook and trying to use the rook down the e file. So somehow getting the rook active. I don't see how I'm going to use my king and pawns really to break through. I think e5 is about the only decent pawn break, e5 or e6, but that would probably be the way I'd play it. Get the rook over and push the e-pawn. Maybe I could do something fancy like bishop c2, rook b8, and then rook b2 or b1, get the rook active a different way. That might also be possible. So after bishop h3, bishop takes d5. Yeah, now on king g4, I was planning on either h5 or rook g8, and I think I was eventually settling on h5. Because if king takes, I can play, I think, bishop f3 check. And if white blocks on g4, there will be rook h8 checkmate. So that looked pretty straightforward. Okay, so I've got some areas where I want to consult the computer and see what it has to say. But that little analysis I ran through, you always want to get in the habit of doing that before you turn on the engine. It's really important to have your own thoughts, not only in-game, but immediately after the game too, about where you could have improved or where your opponent could have improved, or just interesting moments in the game in general that you want to consult the engine with. But you got to have formulated your own thoughts. I can't stress that enough. Don't let the computer do all the thinking for you. You're not going to learn anything that way. Have your own thoughts, your own judgments about what's going on. So let's click over to the analysis board now. Thanks for the support, guys. Already got some people typing in the chat over there. Okay, so just the raw stats on this one down here. I know you guys can't see that, but my opponent had 3 inaccuracies, 2 mistakes, and 1 blunder for a 39 average centi-pawn loss. I had 0 inaccuracies, 0 mistakes, 0 blunders for a 15 average centi-pawn loss. So I like it when it's all zeros all the way down. That's always flattering. That doesn't necessarily mean you played a great game, by the way. The inaccuracies, mistakes, and blunders and average centi-pawn loss on Lichess is just a real baseline indicator of how well you played. I mean, usually the lower the better, of course, but even though it says 0, 0, 0, that doesn't mean there aren't plenty of places where I could have improved and that maybe I should have considered alternative moves. Okay, so yeah, knight c3. As I mentioned, a lot of players might not like to play that move because it does allow this variation, but if white is prepared, white shouldn't fear this line at all. So let me just show you how I would like to continue in an optimal world, in a perfect world where white is just falling in line with my plans. So let's say white plays like knight f3 as he does in the game, knight f6, and then bishop f4, developing the bishop. We're going to go d6, e3, queen a5, attack this pawn. Now they usually end up defending it like so. Knight bd7, let's say bishop d3, knight b6, let's say castle short, and bishop d7. And this whole development scheme looks pretty odd, but it's so hard to find a good plan for white here because these c-pawns are already a big liability, and white has to expend resources trying to defend them. You can see the queen is needed to defend c3, the bishop is needed to defend a4. And from here, black very well may castle on the queen side because it's perfectly safe over there with the position so blocked up. The half-open b file really doesn't amount to much for white. And the king side is probably more exposed because we've already moved the g and the f pawns, and the dark squares are weak. Remember, we've got no dark square bishop. So usually what black will do is castle queenside and possibly play queen a4 as well. So again, let's just make some sort of standard looking moves for white. No, these are not the best moves, but this is just for illustrative purposes. Now black might play queen a4, offer a queen trade, and add another attacker to the c4 square. And if white ignores this trade, let's say they play queen e2, oftentimes you'll see black playing e5 at some moment. The pawn is kind of backward on e7, so e5 is a nice freeing move. And if d takes e6, bishop takes e6, white's pawns are now even weaker because there's no pawn on the d file, so these are now officially double isolated pawns. And look at that, we've got another attacker coming down on that c4 pawn. So this is about the quintessential Dzindzi-Indian position. And if you want one player who plays this occasionally for black, he's a strong player, friend of mine. His name is Robert Hess, American Grandmaster, does some work for chess.com as well. I actually picked this system up from looking at a few of his games from the black side in this line, and I really like the way he handled it. I got a chance to tell him that, actually, over the summer. We were teaching at a camp together in Arizona, and I was like, hey, Robert, I like the way you handle the Dzindzi-Indian as black, and he was very flattered. So, Robert, if you're watching this, you should play the Dzindzi-Indian more often. So, that's a good way to learn openings, by the way, is pick some player who specializes in a system, ideally a grandmaster, and see how they play it. Just play through all their games in a given line, and you'll see over the years how their understanding of the line evolves. So, as I said back here, though, on move 7, or even before, there are other better moves that white can play, like e4 or this h4, h5 idea. Let's just take a quick peek at the opening explorer and just see what scores the best. So you can see that black is actually scoring pretty darn well in this system. I wonder if I have the... Okay, I've got the lead chess database selected, so let's go to the master database. And even in the master database, like, these are not bad stats for an opening that I've already said is kind of dubious. But you can see that h4 is the main move, trying for that h5 stab. And there's a sharp line. So if h4, knight f6, white often does play h5 and just offer to pitch this pawn. So if black plays knight takes h5 here, white can try to sack, or I think they can even play e4. Yeah, you see some games with e4 as well, and just open the position, create some mayhem, and not allow black to get into that setup that I was demonstrating to you guys with queen a5, d6, knight bd7, etc. So yeah, that's an avenue you might want to look into from the white side, or this e4 move right away, which I think could be the best move of all. F takes, and now playing f3. Again, trying to open the position, not exactly worrying about material. Okay, so back to the game. Let's check those moments I was curious about. So yeah, bishop h6 I kind of criticized. Queen a5, queen b3. And now I played knight e4. I'm going to turn the local analysis on. Okay, so knight e4 is indicated. That's probably okay. But as I was saying, if white plays some sort of move here and lets me take on c3, it may not be to my advantage to do so. I guess one thing I didn't consider, though, is it's kind of hard to find a useful move for white, because e3 does allow knight takes pawn. And now there's no bishop d2 pinning the knight. Moreover, if bishop g7, trying to get that double attack I had mentioned, black can move the knight back with check and only then deal with the rook next. So maybe white just lacks a good move to kind of allow black to play knight takes c3, like a logical move to do that. So knight d2, okay, maybe not so bad. Take, take. d6 is all right. And here the computer does not say queen b5. It's saying h4, okay. So let's explore this. So if queen b5 check, I gotta take. Take, knight comes out. So I really thought white getting in c4 would be helpful to them. But maybe not. You can see that eval is slightly in black's favor even. So a6 is still a good idea. Yeah, trying to undermine this structure. I think if I'm going to undermine and attack white's queenside pawns, it's better to do them sooner rather than later. Because if I let white keep this space advantage and get developed, it may not be pretty. I am cramped here, and white possesses the bishop pair. So yeah, a6, that makes good sense. Because if this and take, white would have to take with the c pawn away from the center because the a pawn is pinned. And then that leaves d5 kind of weak. Already I'd wonder about stuff like knight b6, but... Okay, so that's good to know that even though queen b5 check is possible, it's not the end of the world that white has straightened out their pawns and can play c4, because I still have good chances to attack them. So g3 was played. I go knight d7. Yeah, and I guess queen b5 now just seems inconsistent to me. I think if white were going to play queen b5, it should have been on the previous move. This is a big difference now. The fact that I get knight b6 in and c4 is just never possible for white. This is already a half pawn edge to black, and a much easier position to play. Sometimes you can have an objective advantage and have a position that is even more difficult to play than your opponent's. A good example of that is if you're attacking and the computer says your attack is going well, but you need to find precise attacking moves to prove it. And if you don't find those attacking moves, your opponent will either equalize or maybe even get the advantage themselves. So this is not one of those positions, though. Black has a completely safe position. Hardly anything is exposed for me. And white is just struggling to keep their position together and defend these far-flung pawns on d5 and b5. I like the knight into c4, but the computer says just play a6 right away. But I had it in my head to only play a6 when that pawn had reached a4. So I'm not completely disregarding what the computer's saying, but I do like the way I handled it. Yeah, and king d1 is a question mark move, according to the computer. Best is to play h4 followed by h5. What about the plan I had mentioned? So bishop f4, a6, and now let's say castles. So that at least keeps the disadvantage below 1. So better than the king d1 line. Yeah, I do think this is probably the way to go if white's going to try to connect their rooks. Maybe that h4, h5 idea is best, as the computer indicates, but this is another way to go. So here I can take and then probably play king f7 again. Keep my king a little closer to the center. I don't have to castle and get it all the way over to g8. Yeah, and this pawn is still mighty difficult to defend, isn't it? Computer's saying just give it up if you're white. Yeah, because the alternatives are not good. I mean, if white plays rook b1, then I have knight a3 or maybe just a rook penetration. Computer's saying a3, but I also think a2 or even a5 makes sense if I want to go after the pawn that way. So yeah, that pawn is just a goner. So king d1. Now I hit him with a6 here. And the engine says take on b5 immediately. I played king f7. Okay, so that's maybe a slight inaccuracy by me. King f7. Well, I don't know. Is b6 really a problem? Because I did look at this line. b6, take. And I thought if white tries to exploit this b-file pressure, I can take. Yeah, and then get the bishop back to b5 and block off the b-file. Okay, so maybe king f7 is not technically an inaccuracy. Yeah, I don't think I need to release the tension yet. Again, if white takes here, I take with a rook, and the a-pawn is gone anyways. King b3 runs into knight takes d2. So king f7, white plays e4. I take. Okay, bishop takes is correct. Knight a3, let's just check that move. Knight a3, king here. I expressed some dissatisfaction with my knight potentially going to b5. That just didn't seem like the right square. So yeah, I am glad I took with the bishop. And now the computer's indicating a bishop move for white. Yeah, you know, the fact that I'm always able to play knight takes d2 if white keeps the bishop there is really annoying. I mean, I know white's bishop is not impressive, but I don't think they should give me that option at virtually all times. So white took here. And now I had bishop a4 check. Why is that so good? Bishop a4 check, king d3, and then what? Maybe just take back? Let's see. So check, king here. Or not take back, move the knight, and then take back, I suppose. It's a pretty large advantage. King e3 and just take. It's already +2 in black's favor. Yeah, maybe the king is just awkwardly placed out here, and I still have knight c4 whenever I want. But g takes f5 is simple enough, keeps the pawn. Yeah, and here I really didn't like h3 and again followed by h4, as I've described. I took on d2. The computer says rook a3, but I think given my time situation and the fact that I do want to use my b pawn at some stage, I'm satisfied with knight takes d2. Unless there's some way for white to really resist in this position, I think I'm content with my decision, even in retrospect. Yeah, h4, b5. Just not much doing for white. None of these moves are particularly impressive. I mean, bishop f3 does virtually nothing for white. Maybe plays around with the idea of bishop h5 check, but white's not going to suddenly whip up a mating attack or something here. Rook a4, okay, take. Rook a1, all best moves. Yep, rook a3. Play my king up, I think that's a useful move. Alright, yeah, and the computer approves of a lot of this play. Yeah, and that's officially the losing move, bishop h3. So let's just see what the computer says after bishop f3, because it is useful to take a point in the game where either you or your opponent began to really lose the thread and just ended up pitching the game, and try to ask yourself if the game had been played correctly, how you would have continued. So I was saying if bishop f3, I was going to play rook e8 and go for e5. So let's see if the computer agrees. Or, yeah, I think I also mentioned bishop c2 followed by rook b8. Rook a7, I don't really understand what the point of that is. Okay, move this somewhere. Maybe just trying to take away the f3 square. Rook a6, okay. I think Stockfish doesn't know what to do. Okay, Stockfish wants to just kind of move around for a while and then play rook g8. So I guess seeking this avenue for the rook check. And that does make sense, since with the bishop here, we are nicely controlling the f3 square. If white ever plays that, we can trade. And then I guess put the rook behind the pawn again. Or maybe even rook g4. But yeah, that wouldn't be my first instinct. Let's just see. So rook e8, what if I do that? Rook e8. Again, let's just say white's waiting. e5 check, take. Yeah, rook takes. This looks good. I'm not going to claim this is better than what the computer was saying, but yeah, this does look good. If this, there's rook e4 check. Okay. Okay. So anyways, bishop h3. I take on d5. White takes there. And after e5 check, white resigned because they saw that after this I have either h5 or rook g8, and the bishop will be a goner. So just the final thing here is that I was thinking if h5 takes, I don't necessarily have to take this yet and allow g4 check, even though black would be winning there too, but this is a nice nuance. And then if white blocks either g4 or bishop here, we have immediate checkmate because we've taken away the g4 flight square from the king. If I had played rook h8 immediately, white could back the king off here. So play bishop f3. The only other move for white other than g4 or bishop g4 is king here. And yeah, I think check or take on f5, but check is again going to mate, isn't it? So we can do that and then play bishop here. And we even have another example of taking away the flight square, bishop f5, before taking the bishop on h7. And white staring down unavoidable checkmate. Okay, so pretty fun game. This is a nice way to blend, this opening that is a nice way to blend dynamic play with some strategic ideas as well. So we're creating this imbalance, but it's mainly for a strategic purpose, inflicting these double isolated pawn, or these doubled pawns on white, grabbing some space in the center, trying to control e4, and having a clear path of development. So fun line if you ever want to try this out. And I'm pretty satisfied with my play. I think this was a good game. Couple areas where maybe I could have played a bit better, but overall I was able to carry out the main types of plans that I wanted to. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Again, I'll post the links to the games from the Minnesota Open that I played in this past weekend, and I might be doing some video analysis. I don't want to promise anything, but we'll see if I get around to it. All right, guys, have a good one, and thanks again for watching. I'll talk to you later. Bye.